Hi, I'm Harris Seeger. Welcome to Gelli Plate Printing. Gelli Plate Printing is a great introduction into the art of printmaking, which is an indirect method of making an image where you create something with paint or ink on a plate and then transfer that to paper or another substrate. So with the Gelli plates, we have the plate, which is made out of gelatin, and this one is a commercially purchased plate from Speedball, and it's made to last a long time. You can see it's very well loved and well used, and it's kind of squishy, so when you first get it, you'll notice that out of the package it has these two plastic protective sheets, and you want to take at least one of those off, and that's going to be your image making side. You can leave the other one on or take it off. Sometimes if you take it off, it helps to stick it onto the surface that you're going to be using, and it won't move around. But in any case, it comes in different sizes. This one is a 5x7, which I find is a nice size. It's small, enough to do cards, but it's also big enough that I can get a decent image onto it. I can also use it multiple times if I have bigger papers or substrates I'm printing on. I can layer them up, and you'll see how fun, simple, and addictive this method is. So we have our plate. Put the package aside. We have something to print on. In this case, I'm using just watercolor paper. It's not super thick. It's probably like 100-pound 90 to 100-pound watercolor paper. And you'll notice when you start printing with your gel plate, if you're using water-based inks like I am, you can print on almost anything. I like to print on something a little bit stiffer, like a cardstock weight, but you can go up really thick. Because the plate is a little bit flexible and soft and rubbery, you can use a lot of different printing substrates. You can use fabric, you can even use something hard like wood or plexiglass, because it's the plate itself that does the squishing. So we have the paper that we're going to print on. We need something to print with, in this case acrylic paint. And I like acrylics because they're water-based, water-soluble, they clean up with water. They also tend to dry a little bit quickly, and for that reason, I like using particularly the golden open acrylic. And it's called open because it will stay wet longer, it stays open longer, and it's a really good, on the a little bit more expensive side, but it's really good for this method because if you're into making an image and you're working it, you're putting your stencils on, you want something that's not going to dry up on your plate before you get a chance to put it on your paper. So I suggest purchasing a nice set of this golden open acrylic, but if you don't have that, you can use simple acrylic paint, you can use this heavy body paint, you can use often I'll mix the nice paint with the sort of student grade Artist Loft, or Liquitex makes a basics acrylic paint. But it's very versatile because the plate, like I said, is pretty forgiving, and so you don't need to buy expensive block printing inks or monotype printing inks. You don't have to use oil-based, which take a really long time to dry on your paper, and if you're like me, you want to make an image and get it done and out sooner than later. So I don't like waiting for things to dry before I start layering them up, so I like the water-based inks and paints. So these are all acrylic paints, and then you can also use block printing ink, which is designed for printing on just paper, non-sized paper or non-primed paper, and like some oil paints. If you have a set of oil paint and you wanted to try this, you could do that, but just be aware that the oil in the paint might yellow around the paper because it's not designed for an unprimed piece of paper, whereas an ink that's designed for printmaking in particular, like this block printing ink, or even an oil-based printmaking ink will be suitable for your gel plate and your paper. So this is just Speedball block printing ink, and it is also a good alternative if you have this. If you're used to doing block prints, you can certainly use this with your gel plate. Don't tell anyone, but I have mixed this with the acrylic paints on my gel plate. It's not going to hurt anyone or anything because it's both non-toxic and water-based, so they are pretty compatible. They just have slightly different makeups and thicknesses, so just be aware of that, but definitely I have mixed the two together. So that's what we'll be using today for our image. And then to create our images, you could just squeeze the paint directly onto the plate and then plop your paper down, but that doesn't give you a wide range of results. So I have a series of brayers, and the brayers are just rollers. They look almost like a little paint roller, except they have this bridge across them with one handle in the middle. And that's what makes them a brayer versus a roller, which generally has two handles or a handle that comes off of one side. So the brayer is particularly for printmaking, and it comes in different rubber kind of hardnesses, or what's called durometers. And it doesn't really matter for gel plate if you get a soft durometer rubber brayer like this one, or if you use a hard one, because the gel plate again is flexible and squishy, and so it will take a lot of that pressure, and it's sometimes interesting to get different textures if you use different types of brayers. I also recommend keeping your old brayers, even if they get kind of cruddy and pockmarked and have cracks and dents in them, because again, they make really great textures, and that's what gel plate printing is all about. So to make some other textures, you can certainly create your own, like little cardboard pieces with edging. This is just like a cake decorating little plastic flexible decorator. I got this, I think 3 for, I want to say $1. They sell them at the dollar store. They sell them on Amazon. So these produce interesting textures through the ink, which I'll show you. You can use any kind of like mark making tool, like a sponge brush, to make marks. You can scrape and draw with palette knives. Don't get anything too sharp, or you might crease or tear your gel plate, which you don't want to do. But if it's got sort of a dullish side, you can even use the back of a paintbrush, and you'll see how that works in a minute. You can use other types of stencil materials like string. When we lay down the ink, we can put the string down, put our paper down, and it will block out the color. People do this with plants. You can make your own stencils out of paper. You can use store-bought stencils. The one thing that I will say about stencils, or if you're trying to make a design particularly, is that because it's an indirect method, your paper is going to come down onto your gel plate as a mirror image. So if you wanted to, say, use this as the number 9, you would want to make sure that you did not place it face up, right reading on your plate, because that would make it look like a backwards 9 on your paper. So you want to make sure that when you're making your image, that it looks reversed or mirrored on your plate, so that when you put your paper down, it will mirror image correctly. So just be aware of that. But stencils, these cheap stencils make really fun images. You can roll the ink through them and then peel them off. So we're just going to get started squeezing out some paint and making some images. I like to use a glass palette or plexiglass palette to squeeze my ink on, because often I like to mix the colors together. So if I wanted to lighten up, say, this black and make a gray, then I could do that right on my palette with my palette knife, as opposed to squeezing it right onto my plate. But I'll show you both ways because it definitely has advantages and disadvantages. So I'll just take my acrylic paint and I'll squeeze out a little on my block, or on my, plate. I'm also going to squeeze a little on my palette. And I'm going to squeeze out some white. Needs to be replaced. It's okay. Don't want any chunks in there. And so if I was going to mix these two together, I would kind of blend them. And again, because this is all about texture, they don't have to be perfectly blended together. You don't have to have a really even solid color. Just kind of spread it out, and then take your brayer, and first of all I'm going to spread out this ink blob that I just squeezed out onto my plate by just dragging my brayer through, lifting it up and kind of rolling it over and getting these cool textures. So you'll see as we start to print that as we layer up, there will be some ink left on the plate that you can then print again onto another piece of paper. So you don't have to worry about making your first image like exactly the way you want it. You will be able to layer them up and reuse what's still left on your plate for subsequent prints. So I'll just leave that there. I'll use my spongy brush, get some ink on that, transfer some ink onto my plate, just put that there. You'll also notice that I put my brayer roller side up. That was on purpose because I don't want to lay it down and risk having a line stay across it if it dries on the palette like that. So you always want to keep the brayers stored bridge side down, roller side up. Just get in the habit of that. It's a really good idea. So let's take our little cake scraper here and we'll just drag it through and make some cool textures, and I'll show you what that looks like. The other tool that I really like to have handy is a roll of paper towels, because I might not want black on my next print. I'm just going to wipe that off, set it aside, and now I'm ready to print. There's two ways to print your gel plate. I like to print them with the gel plate on the table face up and put my paper down on top of it. But you could also use it like a stamp, put your paper down and then flip your gel plate over. And because it's clear, you'll get a good idea of where you're going to place it. But it tends to get a little bit messier that way because you'll see it kind of transferred to my finger when I lifted it up. So that's why I just like to have a space for my clean paper, space for my plate, and a space for my palette. And then when I set it down, I just give a little burnishing rub to the back. Don't need any fancy tools for this because the plate is so flexible and squishy. It just transfers the ink right on there. So you can see our cool lines that we made and our spongy circles. So I'll let this dry for, I don't know, like 10 minutes, and then I'll be able to reprint over it, which is another really fun part. So now that I have this ghost image, or some of the ink that's still left on from the previous print, I'm going to do a little bit more image manipulation, and I'll use one of my stencils and this sort of teal color. Because I've got two different colors, it helps to have multiple brayers so that you're not dipping your old brayer into the new color and kind of getting a muddy color. So I like to have, I say that you can never have too many brayers, because I do tend to want to use a lot of different colors, but you want them to stay separate, right? You don't want them to have like a blackish blue, because that'll muddy up your image. So I'll just use this stencil and I'll put it right on the gel plate. Again, if it was important that it look one direction on my paper, I would want to flip the stencil upside down. And I'm just gonna roll. Get some more light. Roll it through, being careful not to overlap. Got a little bit there, but that might be okay. Even if that's good, if that's the way you like it, pull off the stencil, set it aside, set your brayer down, and I've got the stencil shape. I might want to do one more thing. Let's see, I'll put my string on as my stencil. We'll see what this does too. It essentially blocks out the ink from transferring, so you'll end up with a white space. So now I'll put my paper down, swish, and I want to be particularly push particularly hard where the stencil string is, because I want all of that ink around it. Make sure it has a nice clean line. So if I didn't push too hard around there, it might end up with a wider line, and of course you can experiment with that. But you can see how much ink was actually left on there. So it's really fun to start building them up now. You can also ink up your stencil, so you could ink up the string and overlay that onto, let's say, let's just do a color, bluish color. Do some little sponge brushing. We'll take our little palette knife and scrape away some of the color. And then I'm also going to ink up this piece of string. Let's see what that does. It might look cool, it might not look cool. I'm just going to lay it right across the top. So what it's going to do is sort of make a halo around where the string, the edge of the string, and it's going to transfer the ink that is on the string. Pushing particularly hard around that string part. If your hands get messy while you're doing this and you want to protect the back of your paper, you can use a separate sheet of paper or a newsprint or newspaper, because sometimes that you're getting just so excited, and it's kind of cool. So the string blocked out the background color, but it also left a little bit of a black grayish area, and if I inked it up even more, it would probably do that better. But you can see where it scraped, where I scraped through, it removed some of that ink. Okay, so you can just keep going and going and going, and you'll notice how kind of addicted it gets. Again, I would recommend using multiple brayers if you're using multiple colors, and when it's time to clean up, say you wanted to switch colors or you were just ready to stop, you could take this whole thing over to the sink. It's non-toxic paint, so it won't hurt you, but it is acrylic paint, and so you don't want to put too much down the sink or it will harden and clog. It forms like a plastic film and coating on your paper, and it will do the same thing in your drain. So you want to make sure that most of the ink or paint is removed from your plate first by just doing, again, using another piece of paper or using a newsprint, newspaper, some kind of scrap magazine page, and just kind of removing as much as you can. I mean, that's even kind of cool. And then once you've removed all that excess, then you can take that to the sink with a little sponge, water. You don't even need soap. Rinse it off. Same thing with your brayers. When you're done with those, you just want to get all the excess ink off as much as you can. And then you can take those to the sink. Your palette, I suggest using either like something to scrape it up with and then put it in a paper towel, or you could just use your paper towel and kind of scoop it all up, and then you can get a damp sponge, or if it's small enough you can take it to the sink and just rinse it and let it dry, or dry with paper towel or towel, like a cloth cotton towel. And with the stencils, I just kind of leave them and let them dry. The acrylic will dry pretty quickly. You can see that the layers do start to build up, but because they're paper, you don't really want to try to clean them. I mean, they're so cheap, you just buy new ones if they get too thick and unusable. So I hope that gave you a little bit of information about Gelli plates. Again, it's super fun, super easy technique, and it's very addictive. So have fun.